Hello, everyone, and thank you for zooming in for tonight's program. My name is Julian Cox. I'm the Deputy Director and Chief Curator at the Art Gallery of Ontario. And the AGO operates on land that is the territory of the Anishinaabe Mississauga Nation. It was also the land of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Neutral, and Seneca nations through time. And it is with great privilege and opportunity that we are able to work and live on this land. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for a special look at Studio 54, behind the scenes. As we proceed through tonight's conversation, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask us any questions. And we'll certainly make some time towards the end of our conversation to address any questions or comments that you might have. So we encourage you to participate in that way. We would really enjoy it. The exhibition Studio 54 Night Magic was meant to open at the AGO just before Christmas holidays on December 26th, actually, Boxing Day. And we had to, of course, delay the opening because of the pandemic. And we hope to be able to welcome everybody in really as soon as it's safe to do so. And so we encourage you to go to ago.ca to get updates on when we will be able to reopen. But the exhibition is installed and looks fabulous. And we're going to have a journey through the exhibition, in a sense, through my two guests tonight. A project of this scale and ambition takes a lot of support and generosity to make it happen. So I just want to quickly thank Johnny Walker Scotch Whisky, a really significant sponsor, and also Shiseido and the Canada Council for the Arts. And the exhibition was presented in collaboration with Spotify, which was the founding partner of Studio 54 at the Brooklyn Museum of Art. I'm really delighted to be joined by the curator of the exhibition tonight, who I'll introduce first, Matthew Yokobosky, who was appointed Senior Curator of Fashion and Material Culture at the Brooklyn Museum of Art in 2018, having before that held the position of Director of Exhibition Design. Prior to joining the Brooklyn Museum, Matthew worked as the Associate Curator of Film and Video at the Whitney Museum of American Art, where he curated really important exhibitions on different aspects of film and video there, and also was the exhibition designer for the Whitney Biennial, for example, in 1995, and Edward Steichen in 2000. Since he's been at the Brooklyn Museum, he has designed more than 95 exhibitions, if you can believe it, and just a few of the extraordinary highlights that he's of shows that he put together over the years are Annie Leibovitz, A Photographer's Life, Murakami, Who Shot Rock and Roll, A Photographic History, 1955 to the Present, The Fashion World of Jean Paul Gaultier, From the Sidewalk to the Catwalk, Killer Heels, The Art of the High-Heeled Shoe, The Rise of Sneaker Culture, Basquiat, The Unknown Notebooks, and Georgia O'Keeffe, Living Modern. And most recently, in addition to putting together, well, in 2018, David Bowie Is, and a fabulous show, Pierre Cardin, Future Fashion, which was in 2019. Of course, Pierre Cardin has just passed away. Matthew curated and designed a really fabulous online exhibition, The Queen and the Crown, a virtual exhibition of costumes from the Queen's Gambit and the Crown. And on top of all of that, he's also done important exhibitions, both designed and curated at important international venues like the National Gallery of Denmark in Copenhagen, the Barbican in London, and the American Center in Paris. So extraordinary experience and talent that he's brought to bear on this project. And you'll see that in no uncertain terms in the conversation as we proceed. And then I'm also delighted to next introduce my colleague, Paul Mathiesen, who is American-born and lived and worked in California, Ohio, Massachusetts, and New York before moving to Canada in the early 1990s. And prior to joining the AGO, Paul worked as a lighting designer for theatre, opera, and live music shows, which included stints with Canadian Stage, the Stratford Festival, the Shore Festival, the Tarragon Theatre. And as an installation technician at the AGO, Paul has brought his talents in lighting design to many of our most important exhibitions over the past decade or so, not including but not limited to Bruce Mau, Massive Change, David Bowie is. So he also worked on that in the same way that Matthew did. Drama and Desire, Artists in the Theatre, Mystical Landscapes, excuse me, and Guillermo del Toro, At Home with Monsters, and presently on view at the AGO, Hegyu Yang, Emergence, and of course, Studio 54, Night Magic. In addition to all that, Paul has also led the very important transition of all of our in-gallery lighting systems from incandescent and halogen lights to LED. But tonight, we're going to, in a sense, go back to where he started by talking about Studio 54. And I'm going to ask maybe Matthew, as the exhibition curator, to take it away and set the scene for us, in a sense, you know, what the club was and what was so very special about that moment culturally, and what sort of led him to take up this project as the originating curator. Matthew.
Oh, thanks, Julian. And thanks to AGO for bringing the exhibition to Toronto. I'm so thrilled. And even though we're working mostly virtual, I am so proud that it's ready, and looking forward to everyone enjoying it once we all reopen. The exhibition really began when I saw a book that Ian Schrager, one of the founders of Studio 54, had done. It was a large coffee table book, and he was reflecting on 40 years since they had opened Studio 54 in 1977. The New York City in the 1970s, and Paul will know this very much, you know, it was a little bit of a rundown period in New York, and people were really grappling with the idea of what the new culture might be. Because it was run down, a lot of artists and musicians moved to New York City. And we had a moment where there was a creation of 3 new music genres. Punk started with the Ramones and different groups at CBGBs. Hip hop began in the South Bronx. And disco was beginning in underground nightclubs, gay nightclubs, Latin nightclubs, downtown African-American nightclubs. And it was this percolation of this music that got Steve and Ian into the disco business. They first opened a club called the Enchanted Garden in a neighborhood in New York called Queens, but it's a little bit outside of the main Manhattan. So eventually they found a building on 254 West 54th Street that had a history of being an opera house and a federal theater during the Depression in the 1930s. And then it became a radio and sound set for CBS television for about 40 years. Ian and Steve bought it, and when they first saw the space, they met with designers, Jules Fisher and Paul Morantz, lighting designers. They met with an interior designer named Ron Dowd, and together they started making decisions about how to transform a theater into a nightclub. And I'm sure Paul's going to tell us a lot of the details about that.
Thank you, Matthew. That's a great cue. So you were just, in a way, talking about the talent, and Paul, you're part of that talent. So tell us how you came to be part of the circle, in a way, of creative minds and talents that Matthew was just describing.
Okay, good. Well, I was a theater lighting designer working off Broadway. Up so far off Broadway at 103rd Street and over on the west side at Equity Library Theater. And I had just lit a show and got along really well with the producer. This was in the late winter. And after the show opened, she got a call saying from Mark Kruger, who was the project manager or production manager for Fisher Marantz, the lighting designers. And her call from him was that they were looking for an electrician to work in a new nightclub that was going to open sometime soon. And I guess I got along so well with her that for some reason she said, would I like to go down and interview at this nightclub that was going to be in a theater on Broadway. And I guess I kind of jumped at the chance. I went for my interview early in February, I think it was. And I had a great interview with Mark Kruger, and in the middle of that, he said, okay, I think you're not the right person to be the electrician. I didn't have the road experience for concert lighting. I hadn't done sort of big electrical work. I was used to kind of building my own lights out of coffee cans and light bulbs. At any rate, he said, but I'm going to introduce you. I like you. I'm going to introduce you to one of the owners. And we marched up to Ian Schrager's second floor office in one of the old dressing rooms, stage left on the second floor. And I was introduced to Ian, and Mark and Ian had a little conversation about Paul works in the theater. I like him. I think he's right. Ian said, okay, we'd like to hire you, but you'll be the flyman. And the flyman, for those of you who are not in the theater, is the person who runs the scenery and the lighting equipment that's over the stage, in and out with a series of ropes and pulleys, and also has to know rigging. And I said, well, I'd like that job, but I know even less about rigging than I do about electrical work. And they said, we want somebody who's worked in the theater, who's got that theatrical background. The other person, the main lighting person, is from the disco world. I think Robbie, it was his name, and he used to work for Steve and Ian at Enchanted Garden. But we want this theater person, you're hired. So I said, well, great, how much? And Ian said, let's just get started, and we'll work that out. And I started working that night.
Super.
Yeah, and kind of worked not quite around the clock at that point, but for the next 5 weeks, because they had poured the floor, the dance floor, and taken out the orchestra seats.
Yeah.
And for the next 5 weeks, I worked getting it set up and getting ready for opening night.
Thank you, Paul. That's great. We're going to come back to a number of sort of things that you mentioned there, but just before we proceed, maybe you could just quickly describe what we're looking at here. Obviously, it's a dance floor, but maybe you could say a little bit about this other area through the center here and some of the equipment that's on view.
Sure. We're looking at the balcony rail from upstage, from behind what would have been the actors facing the audience. So balcony rail, and the upper third of the picture looks like a lot of people standing, looking out over the dance floor, which would have been kind of behind this picture, not behind me talking. And there are a couple of Richard Long's multi speaker bins with mid-range and medium-low speakers. There's some theater lights and rock and roll lights. Nothing too fancy. There are a couple of lights in the center called a Mars 88, which was a kind of bouncing spotlight in red. They were used on fire trucks. A couple par cans from rock and roll at the upper part of the picture, very up, there's a series of lights. Those are called X-rays, which would have provided color on the dance floor. And just below that X-ray, at the kind of in the center of the picture, you see a police beacon on one of what you'll see later is one of the chase poles.
Great.
And there were 12 of those chase poles. Obviously, somebody's shot or dropped mylar, confetti, balloons, we had all of that.
Great, great. Thank you, Paul. That's a really great sort of start for us. I wanted to just sort of just pivot for a second now to maybe come back to you, Matthew, for a moment around design, because we're looking here at the logo of Studio 54 designed by Gil Lesser. And also, I think this is your business card, Paul, and both actually designed by the same person. I mean, Matthew, can you just give us a few words about Gil Lesser and sort of where he fits into the story?
Yeah. Well, I think if you have read or seen anything about Studio 54, you've seen the logo on the right for Studio. And when they were designing the theater, they were also immediately designing the logo. So they had 4 bids to design the logo. 2 were fashion illustrators. One was Antonio Lopez. Another was Joe Eula. And both of them were highly regarded and did beautiful drawings, which you'll see in the exhibit. One was done by the designer who designed the Rolling Stones tongue. And then the 4th one was done by Gil Lesser, who was the art director at Life magazine and did the masthead for Life. What's interesting about this is that when it was originally designed, it looked like it was straight, like you saw in the first image that Julian saw. But Ian Schrager, who worked on this and after Studio went on to design boutique hotels, had such a great eye that he was the one that tilted the 54 so that the side of the 5 and the 4 are parallel to the side of the sheet of paper. And it was that attention to detail that I think made Studio and so many of the projects Ian worked on have that extra level of polish.
Yeah, for sure. And for you, Paul, it must have been quite something to have your stationery designed by someone, you know, who was that successful.
Oh yeah, I was proud beyond belief that Gil Lesser said, "Okay, yeah, I'll design your stationery." It was incredible to me that he would do that. I think I met him at Studio 54 when he did, and Matthew, you could correct me if I'm wrong, he also did the logo for People magazine. Do you know if that's correct or not?
I actually, this is the first time I've heard that, but it could be true. One of the things I did hear about Gil Lesser, though, was that his office was all black. And he used to wear a black suit, and he would come in a black suit and he would only have on a red tie. And that would be the only color in the entire office.
I think Steve Rubel, the other co-owner for Studio 54, or Ian, and I don't remember whose apartment it was, up on the, early in the 77, designed by maybe Ron Dowd and Scott Bromley, was also all black. I don't remember which one of those guys had that.
Ian.
Right.
Ian's apartment was designed by Ron Dowd. And
makes sense.
It was mostly black.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. So if Gil Lesser did People magazine, I would have met him while doing the lighting for that, whatever we did for that event, and got along. And what you see on the left is my business card, which it just so happens I'd seen online a year or so ago as a part of some cache of belonging to Steve Rubel.
Oh, great. So, that's great. And you were reunited. That's great.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to just flip the conversation a little bit to talk about the exhibition. I mean, you can just, folks who are tuning in, you can tell the depth of knowledge of both the guests tonight speaking about the period. And here's a couple of photographs of the installation of the AGO. And maybe I'll go to you first, Matthew, just to sort of briefly describe what people are looking at, and then to you, Paul, just to mention a little bit about how you've approached the lighting and some elements that were important to you. You first, Matthew.
Well, one of the things that attracted me to Studio 54, of course, was that it was multi-sensory. And, you know, so many of the projects I've worked on are a combination of photography and fashion and film and music. And what we're looking at here are two scenes from the installation. And on the left, you have fashions by Norma Kamali, who is one of the great designers of the 70s. We're looking at where Julian's pointer is actually on one of the original sleeping bag coats that Norma wore, that Norma designed in the 70s, worn by Myra Shear, one of the door people. And also during the 70s, she designed the parachute coat. And so both the sleeping bag coat and the parachute coat were fashion items that she created out of other existing made items. You know, it was like making ready-mades out of fashion. And also you see the I Love New York logo, which came out about the same time as Studio 54. Ironically, the I Love New York campaign started the day after the blackout of 1977 in New York. So together, I Love New York, Studio 54, Saturday Night Live, Saturday Night Fever, all of these things together helped to rebrand New York. On the right, we're looking at fashions by three designers, Stephen Burrows, Halston, and Calvin Klein, in juxtaposition with a video projection of the lights that were at Studio 54, the famous light poles. There weren't that many films recorded at Studio 54. There was, you know, there were television, there are records of television crews that came to studio, but you know, one of the tragic things that happened with a lot of footage shot during the 70s by television stations is that they were put into vaults and a lot of them weren't kept. So a lot of footage was destroyed. And we're lucky here to have footage that was recorded by two NYU students in the 70s. They were working on their masters, and Michael Overington, who is one of the managers at Studio 54, had been a film student at NYU. These two young people came to him to see if they could shoot footage at studio. And it's because of them that we have this documentation.
Yeah, super. Thank you, Matthew. And Paul, there's obviously a lot you could say about lighting, but maybe you could tell us what this, in the center here, just to the left, this wonderful patterning is on the floor. How you created this effect.
Okay, sure. It's a metal disc about 3.5 inches in diameter, like a stencil. And that stencil is in this particular instance, is a silhouette of a series of pine trees. And it's in a special lighting instrument called a LECO, or ellipsoidal reflector, with a series of lenses which you're able to, basically you're making a slide and projecting that on the floor. That is about 8 or 9 foot diameter. And it's also in a rotator that's in the center of that light. And that rotator has two pieces of metal, one that's rotating clockwise, the other one counterclockwise. And so there's a shimmer to the light that's on the floor. And I colored that light with a kind of pink for that part of the room. And I colored the floor around that with a blue. And those were kind of lighting tricks that I learned in the theater that we used at Studio 54, sort of for all the special events. There was a lot of theater lighting it wasn't just flashing disco lighting. It was quite a bit of theater lighting that we used. And in the exhibit, as I lit it at the AGO, I use the idea of this gobo, G-O-B-O, it's spelled, as a kind of a motif throughout a number of the galleries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I had the good fortune of being privy to these fascinating conversations between Matthew and Paul around, how do we recreate the look and feel of the nightclub without trying to sort of slavishly copy it. And of course, the exhibition is full of beautiful, rare, and quite vulnerable objects of various different media. So you can't just sort of flood everything with light. You have to be very deliberate about light levels and so forth. And so there's a lot of detailed thinking and problem solving that goes into the end result, which again, we hope you can come and see as soon as it's safe to do so. We're going to keep moving now, and this is a great image. I'm so happy we were able to include it because, as I understand it, Paul, this is you on the fly rail. This is you being the fly man. Is that correct?
This is actually me being flown by somebody, okay, by a temporary flyman or fly person who's over on the fly rail. I'm about, what we're looking from the picture was taken from the dance floor. We're looking up into the grid above the stage at about, I'd say 40, maybe 50 feet up in the air. I'm standing on the end of a pipe and I have my arm around one of the ropes that's the pipe is rigged to. And I've been lifted up 40, 50 feet in the air to work with a soldering iron on an electronic cable that had been separated sometime the night before.
Yeah. So
this is by one of the other pipes.
So this is sort of daytime maintenance work and preparation work for the show. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And
okay,
it went on all day long.
Yes.
With the abuse and the wear and tear on the technical equipment, the lighting equipment. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was a full-time job.
Yeah.
As was my night job.
Yeah. Just moving along now, this is a fascinating picture, and I think actually Matthew's mentioned to me in other conversations how Richard Manning was often sort of behind the scenes making photographs such as this one. But Paul, maybe you can just describe what is this sort of contraption that this person's working on? What are we looking at here?
Right, they're looking at a mid 20th century, very early auto transformer lighting board. It was original to the theater, at least during the CBS era. I think you could maybe even date it a little bit earlier, that the lighting operator has their hands around a bunch of dimmer handles, which are able to lock together. That was pretty exciting whenever this kind of auto transformer boards were invented, because there could be a master lever, and you could lock different dimmers to that. So one person could do 6 or 8 different things at a time instead of having 6 or 8 operators all working individual levers. The other interesting thing in this picture is when you zoom in on the upper left-hand side of the picture, there are tags written on the underneath all of the dimmers. And that one says, I can't remember if it says moon or nose. And so it was one of the lighting controllers for the moon and spoon effect, which we'll be looking at later. The other dimmers are for color and different special effects. And this person is actually one of the 3 technical crew running the light show and the stage show every night. There was the main lighting operator, who was the public face of all of the disco lighting and had all of the kind of smart electronic and for its time rather advanced equipment. There was this backstage dimmer, which was controlling the brightness levels that the disco operator or the disco light operator was running. And then myself, I worked on the floor, flying in all of this different equipment or lifting it out and working on all the special effects like the snow, the mylar, things like that we'll be talking about.
I'm just going to move on to the next one now. I mean, this is helpful because it's in color, but you can get a sense of the massing of the lighting equipment. And I mean, this truly looks like a backstage picture, but is this area that, am I right in describing this area as what we call the bridge?
Yes, so that's not from 1977. The bridge was added later.
Yeah,
Overhead, like a 5-ton or something overhead traveling crane, which would have been used in industrial sites to move heavy equipment around a warehouse or a power plant, or some very, very big heavy duty industrial equipment.
yeah,
All around that are kind of rock and roll and theater lighting effects.
yeah.
Yeah.
And if we sort of flip the photo, not flip the literal photograph, but this is more like the disco goer's view. We can see some blurred figures in the foreground, but here I think you get that the sort of sense of drama of the club. And just before I go to you on this, Paul, I wanted to ask you, Matthew. I mean, because you spent more than 2 years researching this club and talking to different people that worked at it, and obviously Ian Schrager, you worked closely with him. But sort of what were some of the ingredients of the club that you were sort of most taken by in terms of the kind of the aspect of it that we're talking about a lot tonight, the lighting and the stage sets and so forth?
Well, what I was fascinating about working on the project was exactly how many designers were working on it. It wasn't, not most, but a lot of the nightclubs at the time were black box, just warehouse spaces, and they would have lighting and a sound system and maybe a big swath of balloons or something. And at Studio 54, it really took it up a notch. And so what we're looking at in this photograph is that in addition to the iconic light poles, on the first year anniversary, they decided that they were going to do a renovation, which then happened in September of '78. And what you're looking at is a neon fan that was designed by the Broadway designer, Tony Walton. He would go on to win an Academy Award for designing parts of All That Jazz with Bob Fosse.
Yeah,
And Tony had the quick story is that Tony had designed the first production of Chicago, which opened on Broadway in '75. It ran for 2 years, it closed, and they were looking for new things to have at studio, and Fisher and Marantz worked with Tony and said, you should bring the neon fan over. Well, that happened, and then Tony made proposals for other set pieces. So you see in the middle of the fan, you can see the bottom of the smoking sun. And there is also a pendulum heart, and we have great models for them in the exhibition.
yeah. I think this is a sort of component of the show which is so thrilling to me, and we're going to now sort of pivot to another element here, which I mean, both of you could speak in really interesting ways to, I know, but the work of Dean Janoff and Richie Williamson, The Moon and the Spoon with Planets, which is a sort of iconic, in a way, piece of staging for the club. And what's so extraordinary to me, as I understand it, is that in a way, what we're looking at is fairly low tech. I think the symbol of the moon is made out of, I think, painted plywood, obviously with some lighting elements here added coming from the eye down the nose. And then these spheres, which are obviously like sort of rotating planets, are made, I think, of cardboard or paper that's then been varnished. So it's sort of this fabulous theatrical effect, but it's in fact fairly low tech, isn't it?
Yeah, like some of the techniques for the scenery, some of the lighting was very low tech, almost mundane. The planets would be something you could almost make that at home out of paper mache. They didn't light up. There wasn't a motor to twist them. They were on 3 or 4 different pipes and would fly in at different levels over the dancers' heads. They didn't do anything. And sometimes that would happen, that the moon and spoon would fly in front of this blue backdrop or cyclorama black backdrop. And as the moon flew in on the end of a traveler track from off stage to center stage, it was also being lowered. And the spoon, which was twinkling, would...
You've frozen slightly there, Paul. Maybe you could try to...
It was often then snowing plastic snow from overhead, or mylar bits, or we were shooting confetti out of cannons from around the stage.
Yeah.
Or, there was stuff happening all over. So
Yes.
In this kind of mundane equipment, there was marvelous things happening all around you.
Yes. And in a way, I'm going to move
all
along.
the time, all night long.
Yeah. And you've adapted that moon and spoon motif in a really interesting way for the presentation in the AGO. And it's a short video I'm going to play now. And maybe you could just sort of say a few words as I play it now. Oh, sorry.
Okay, well, this is it.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see, that jumped quite a bit there, Matthew. If you want to start that again, it seems to be skipping.
I think your connection's a bit weak, Paul.
Can you start that again? Yeah.
Paul, you might want to turn your camera off because you're freezing a little bit. Can you try that? Try turning your camera off, Paul, and we'll see if we can get you back. Meanwhile, I'm going to move on, and hopefully you'll come back shortly. You'd mentioned a little bit earlier on, Matthew, about Jules Fisher and Paul Morantz as being so important, really, for creating some of the lighting effects and schemes within the club. And in a way, Morantz was something of a genius at sort of developing he was sort of instrumental in developing the concept of the club in a way.
Mm-hmm. No, Jules Fisher and Paul Morantz were just so vital to the design, as you can see here in this original sketch of the light poles coming down. And one of the intriguing things about the light poles is that they have police lights at the bottom of them. And Paul Morantz told me the story about having been out in the desert in Arizona, and it was nighttime and there was a police car going off at a distance, and he saw the light going around and around, and imagined how incredible that would be to have that effect happening in a discotheque. So, a lot of things just come from observation and interpretation. Paul had done a clothing store lighting design where he had a pole of lights that went through the floor of a clothing store. And so the light really became the joiner between the different floors of the clothing stores. So when we were looking at that photograph of Paul up on the railing at 40 feet, one of the intriguing things to know is that Studio 54, when you walked in, it was 84 feet tall. It was a huge space. So, and that having all of that space allowed for you to have different changing sets and lighting. And one of the things I would also mention is that since it had been a television studio, the lights that you had for a television studio were as hot as the lights that you used for making a movie. Because film wasn't as sensitive and the television cameras weren't as sensitive yet, you had to brightly light things, and brightly lighting them created a lot of heat. So Studio 54 actually had, when they got the building, it had a fabulous air conditioning system.
Yeah.
And that was different from, you know, most any nightclub at the time, where you would go and sweat.
Yes.
So when you look at the photographs of people at studio, they could wear fabulous outfits and do their makeup and hair because they weren't going to perspire.
Right. Or they could at least sort of tastefully perspire, right? And not be
Yes.
totally drenched. Yeah. That's, and I mean, that's something that's really important to the designers that would, and celebrities who they would design for that frequented the club. So it's these sort of details are so kind of fascinating, really, to the overall success of this club, which you didn't mention at the outset, but it has this extraordinarily sort of brief but bright life. You know, 33 or so months is the total kind of time span that the club in its original concept really lasts for. So it's this sort of meteoric moment of incredible sort of collision of great creativity and culture and so forth. We're trying to get Paul back again momentarily to talk about his work, but this is a sketch that he made to recreate the chase pole lighting system for the AGO, which is sort of beautifully installed at the gallery now and operates on a sort of syncopated rhythm here, where the two primary colors, yellow and red, although there are also some others, sort of flux in and out of each other. And he came up with a wonderful system to allow them to sort of fade in and out of each other. And you can see here this wonderful sketch in Paul's hand, chase pole impression 11/25/20. So he was deep in the thick of improvising the best way to show this lighting and bring that facet of the club alive for our audience. And here's a photograph that kind of illustrates that on the right-hand side, which is in a sort of transitional space between one half of our galleries to the second half. And you see this wonderful trio of chiffon designs on the axis here. But a good example of the chase poles that have been designed by Paul for our installation. And they have this wonderful plexi see-through layer on each side, so you can actually see the lighting technology and how it's designed. Matthew, would you like to say just a couple of words about this sort of wonderful sort of runway installation here and some of the designs that are there?
Yeah, the gallery that we're looking at on the left is our fashions from late 1979, primarily by Calvin Klein. In the exhibit, we have both casual wear, which would be the designer jeans that were popular in '79, as well as Calvin Klein's evening ensembles, which were often made out of gold lame and different variations on it.
Yeah.
One of the things I would just mention is there's a great story about Calvin Klein had been at Studio 54 at 4 in the morning, and a man came up to him and said, "Have you ever considered designing jeans, blue jeans?" And we all know about Calvin Klein blue jeans today, but stories like that came out of studio, which are, you know, the more I researched, the more happened there.
Yeah. Thanks, Matthew. Paul, it's great to see you back. Can you hear us okay?
Back.
Good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
we can, yeah. I had just talked a little bit about the chase poles, but could you tell us just about the lighting solution here on the left-hand side? I think I've lost you again. I'm going to keep going.
well, I'll just say a pinch, and then Paul
Please.
can always join later.
Yeah.
One of the renovations
Justin, I
done
really
at
don't remember the
Studio.
designer's
Oh,
name.
you're back again. Okay, are you back? No. Was a designer named Bran Farron, and he was brought in to design these mirrored panels with neon. And oh, there we go. It looks like we have Paul. No, and and
Okay.
and
Okay, I'm back.
oh, we can hear you, Paul.
Okay, good. So I'll try again. I was trying to talk about the ideas behind the lighting at the AGO that were based on the lighting that I was a part of 40 years ago. And what I wanted to do was evoke the light, or the feeling of light, the surprise of the light at Studio 54 when you were there from 10 o'clock at night till 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. Wherever you turned, there was something going on. And that's shown, you can see that in the aerographics made a really wonderful animation of all of the special effects, or many of the special effects for you, Matthew. And there's lots of video in the show that shows all of the lots of the different effects with people dancing. But I wanted to have you enveloped or wrapped in this light. So the picture on the left shows the neon, I called them the neon X's. I don't remember what they were called at the time. They were designed by a Dutch designer who came in. He was also the gentleman who designed the idea, or came up with the idea of the overhead traveling crane, or the bridge as we called it. And they changed colors softly. They spread this very soft and kind of ambient. In this, right now, we're looking at a kind of blue, green, and purple. And they were made of actual neon by the same neon company that built the Tony Walton piece for Chicago, a company called Artcraft Strauss Neon. We're no longer on the Upper West Side. And well, I guess that's probably enough about the neon X's. I could talk about the baseballs if you want to hear more about that.
That's great, Paul. I want to just sort of keep moving in the interest of time. Just to show this sort of wonderful use of Mylar, which you really encouraged us to pursue. Obviously, we talked about it closely with Matthew. We've got on the right-hand side here 2 fabulous photographs by Todd Papageorge, who frequented the club and made these great images of revelers sort of in the various stages of the evening. And then this wonderful use of the logo again over the Mylar, which we've used in a couple of sort of discrete places in the exhibition. And I think, again, has turned out really, really nicely. I'm just going to keep it moving and show a few of these sort of fabulous behind the scenes kind of pictures of different people that worked at Studio. Tell us about your memories, Paul, of Mark Beneke, who was one of the doormen there.
Yeah, Mark was if I recollect correctly, was the second doorman. And he's the one that's kind of probably the most famous of the two after Steve Rubell. And I don't recollect the name of the first doorman. Very handsome, good-looking guy, kind of tall, slender, dressed well, who, along with Steve Rubell, came up with the door policy. Mark Beneke was the sort of junior to that first guy and took over when that first gentleman went to open up some other clubs, I think.
Yeah.
Might have been Bonds down on Washington Square somewhere.
Well, he looks like he's keeping the punters happy in this picture.
Well, everybody needed a bit of candy, I guess, while they were waiting to be invited inside. Why he's not in a suit jacket and kind of very dapper looking at.
There are other shots of him certainly looking that way. I love these 2 pictures of a couple of the security guys with as you've said it before, the customary fried chicken here in the lower foreground and so forth.
Yeah, in fact, even the picture on the left, Chuck Garlick might be reaching for a piece of that fried chicken. Anytime we had a special event, Ian hired a caterer for the talent for the show. And I don't remember the caterer's name, but we almost invariably had fried chicken, and the crew
Yes,
had to eat that.
I
Remember
there's
one?
a
Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, Paul, there's a really good question that's come in from one of our attendees that
Yeah.
is relevant to actually both of you guys. So I'll put it out there now because it sort of connects nicely to the next picture I want to show. But can you say a little bit more about what it was like in the club? You know, for example, people who went there. And of course, this was in the heart of the AIDS era or sort of on the cusp of it. So could you offer some reflections on that, please?
Yes, from my end, I was 25. I've never been in a discotheque before, or nightclub, and for me, it was an eye opener. Sometimes there were the same people there 6 nights a week, all night long, and they were Wall Street bankers, they were secretaries, they were garbage men, they were celebrities. Like this mix that you kind of have read about and hear about of, and the door policy at Studio 54 and the celebrities, and this mix of people watching and being watched was, for me, it was a thrill. From 10 o'clock at night till I walked out of there at 6 o'clock in the morning and got a fried egg sandwich next door at this little dive bar place.
Yeah.
It was wild inside. And it was fun. It was exciting. It was surprising. It was sweaty. It was dirty. It was grimy. It was sexy. It was joyous. It was, amongst all this loud noise, banging lights, crashing
Yeah.
Nerf cannon showering people with confetti and mylar and balloons and snow and
Yeah.
actresses or talent, if we were doing a show like this, you were bombarded by this excitement.
Yeah.
There was no way to be like up and kind of crazed by it for 6-7 hours, whatever. So
Yeah.
it was nuts in the best way and in also some kind of, not so nice ways.
Yes.
My memory is mostly of the really exciting best ways. It was genius the way all this was put together
Yeah.
with the 700 people a night and Steve and Ian and the stage crew and the designers who were doing the special events. It totally worked.
Paul, thank you. Matthew, anything to add to that?
Oh, the quotes from Steve were always about we were trying to make it the best dinner party. If you were going to have an event at your home, how would you invite a mix of people so that it was interesting for everybody?
Yeah.
You didn't want to have just Wall Street. You didn't just want to have, secretaries. I mean, you wanted to have a mix of people so that it made it a more interesting event. And
Yeah.
Mark Benecke said that when he was trying to pick people to let in at the door, he was always looking for energy. Who was going to bring something to the party?
Yeah. Thank you. There's a great question that's just come in that I think is good for both of you, but especially maybe for Paul. Based on your experience at Studio 54, what are the 3 elements to a successful party? Kind of smile emoji.
Good people, fun people, who were out to have a good time, maybe some alcohol, to sort of lubricate the wheels a bit.
Yeah.
Great music. Those are 3 things. There might be a 4th, like just a surprise around every corner.
Yeah.
Who you're talking to, who you're dancing with, the architecture. Maybe the surprise is the first thing
Yeah.
that was so exciting at that place.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. This picture we're looking at of Bianca Jagger is exactly that, a surprise where she, sits astride this horse, almost like Lady Godiva. And this picture was published in newspapers all over the world, sort of in the days that followed. And I think the owners of the club were sort of masterful, really, in using the photographic image, paparazzi, and so forth to drive the word of mouth about the club and to make it even more of a sensation that you didn't want to miss out on.
Now, who would want to miss out on Bianca Jagger, and who would want to miss out on that white, gorgeous horse? And
Yes.
the two of them in a nightclub while the music is, I don't recall what song was being played when she strode in on it, but
Yeah.
it was wherever you turned, there was something like that going on. And it was, a thing like that, she would have been on the horse for a minute, maybe. She would have been led in by, I think I've seen a picture of Ian and walking in with the horse handler.
Yeah.
She got on the horse backstage. We would have lifted a drop that would have revealed her sitting on the horse, snapping pictures, and it's over, and something else happens, a minute later. And that got in the newspaper.
Right.
There was something almost daily in the newspapers.
Paul, sorry to cut you off. I wanted to ask you, Matthew, that we know there were a lot of celebrities, moving through the club: Diana Ross, Liza Minnelli, Jerry Hall, Grace Jones, Michael Jackson, etc. But what about artists? People, Basquiat or others of that ilk. What can you say about the club as a kind of locus for artists, the artist scene in New York?
Well, as we talked about earlier, a lot of young artists moved to New York in the 70s. And, Basquiat mainly went to like the Mud Club, which was more kind of a rock and roll new wave club. At Studio 54, of course, there's lots of photographs of Andy Warhol was there. I've also seen photographs of artists like James Rosenquist.
Yes.
He would be there. But, Steve always talked about the fact that during the 60s, it was the rock and roll musicians who were the big people. During the 70s, it was the fashion designers. And it really wasn't until the 80s that artists became more of celebrities at nightclubs. So Studio 54 really cultivated fashion designers, Calvin, Halston, Stephen Burrows, Norma.
Yeah.
It was at Steve and Ian's next club after Studio 54 when they opened up in 1985 at the Palladium down on 14th Street, much bigger. Irato Itzozaki, big famous architect, that was his first North American build. That's where the artists, that's where Basquiat, Keith Haring, Tony Sharf, I think that's first name, Kenny
Sharf,
that's where those guys, the East Village art scene was in the mid 80s. And that's when, referring to something that you said earlier, Julian, that's when AIDS was at its height. Not so much at Studio 54. Studio 54 kind of, I think, I'm not a sociologist, but sort of led into that AIDS. But the art scene was downtown, or that downtown art scene was later.
Thank you for that, Paul. We're coming towards time here, but I do want to spend just a moment or two maybe to ask you, Matthew, about music and the soundtrack. I mean, we think of all the incredible artists of that time: Gloria Gaynor, Donna Summer, the Bee Gees, Village People, Chic, it just goes on and on. Just sort of summarize a little bit for us how your kind of journey thinking about the music and the soundtrack for the exhibition that both in Brooklyn and at the AGO?
Well, first and also Fran Jolie from Canada. Let's a shout out for her.
Yeah.
You know, well, when I was started to work on the show, I really thought it was important to have the soundtracks, the mixes, and my original proposal was to have a live DJ in the galleries at all times. Didn't quite work that way, but I was able to find original recordings made at studio, and those are what became the basis for what you hear in the exhibition.
Yeah.
On the left here, we see one of the most famous DJs at studio, Richie Kazor. Richie Kazor is noted for being the person that made Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive a hit. It was originally a B-side, but because Richie started playing it, it became a #1 record, and she went on to win a Grammy Award for it.
Yeah.
I can go on and on.
Yes, yeah. And of course, Sarah Dash, who, you know, is part of Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells. I mean, and then works also with, I think, the Stones and Keith Richards. I mean, it's just sort of a wonderful kind of litany of extraordinary, you know, vocalists and performing artists that came through the club. Yes. One of the questions that we've got from a couple of people tuning in, and there's some great questions, we thank you for asking them, is do you guys think that, do you think, in your honest opinion, could Studio 54 exist today?
I would say not in the same way. You know, it was, I would say not in the same way. It was like right at the sort of low point of New York. Of course, we've been through other low points, as we all know, especially recently in both the States and around the world. And there, the sort of joyousness, you know, lifted people up, you know, in music, drugs, yes, and money was kind of changing, how real estate was changing, all that. It really hit a spot.
Yeah.
That I think, I don't know if you could sort of narrow it into such a tight spot nowadays. It's a kind of much broader thing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Matthew, I wanted to ask you, because you've used this sort of wonderful phrase that is there in the exhibition that I think is so evocative. Maybe you could just say a few words about it, but this phrase, you know, the lightning in a bottle effect, that you describe that as being the club in a way. So could you sort of comment on that and you know, respond to the question from the same question in a way that Paul's just answered?
Well, Studio 54, as you mentioned earlier, was really only open for 33 months. And it really rises and falls with the popularity of disco music. You know, when you look at the charts in 77, 78, some disco songs are hitting the top 10, but by 1979, over half the songs in the Billboard chart, #1, were disco songs. And then 1980 comes and there's 2. So you kind of have this rise and fall that echoed what was happening in music at the time, and fashion, and in the visualization of the music, in the set design, the fashion design, the beauty. All of those things together were within this bubble of Studio 54. And it burst in the early 80s. You know, a lot of people have tried to replicate the energy of Studio 54. There, for a brief time, there was a small version of Studio 54 in Barcelona. There was one in the Bahamas. There was a man named Amir from Paris that came to Studio 54 and stayed for 6 weeks, went back to Paris and bought a theater and opened La Palace nightclub, which is still open today.
Yeah.
And then in Miami, you might remember about 10, 15 years ago, there was a club called Live. LIV, which are the Roman numerals for 54.
Right.
So Studio 54 kind of can come back in different forms. I would say the big difference today is camera phones.
Mm.
You know, if you went to Studio 54, you know, there might be a few photographers, and there might be a Bob Colacello, who is the editor of Interview, who might snap a picture now and then. But it wasn't like today. And so there was a lot of privacy at Studio 54. You could go and express yourself and not have to worry about having a bad photo out in the world.
Yeah.
And even though today, I think, you know, maybe everybody could check their phones before they went into
Yes.
the club, it's unlikely, you know.
Yeah.
So it's a different thing.
Yeah, and Paul, you said to me this in another context, but in a really way that really stuck with me, that, you know, at that moment you felt for yourself that, you know, something about the club that you could really do, you could do anything at that time with the vision and the willpower and the creative ability. And in a sense, that was sort of what you were exposed to through working with Marantz, working with Schrager, working with all these great people that, you know, was a huge sort of stimulus for the career path that you've taken, right?
Yeah, I learned, I think all along in my career, that if you've got a vision, you sight somewhere that you want to go, and you put your mind to it, and you put your efforts to doing something really great, terrific, wonderful, fun, exciting, new, that it's possible. I think I learned that from Ian Schrager and his, you know, the people that he surrounded himself with, who were creative types,
Yeah.
who had the energy to do the work. So it wasn't just ideas. Like, we were out there every night, you know, with big ideas, and not always a big pocketbook.
Yeah.
You know, making exciting work. And
Yeah.
I think that's, I've always seen that as something I learned from Ian. I can see that with what Matthew has done with the exhibit that's up at the AGO now.
Yeah.
That, you know, you have a vision, you've got an idea. If you want to work on it, it's possible to really make something really, truly amazing.
On that note, Paul, thank you very much, both of you, for all the passion, knowledge, and smarts that you poured into this project. We're very grateful. Thank you to everybody for tuning in this evening. We've run a little bit over, but thank you for staying with us. It's been great. And you know, leaving, you know, on the screen now is just a small handful of some of the images that you can see in the exhibition when it's open to the public. So wherever you are, please come and see us and enjoy the show. We can't wait to welcome you back. And thanks so much for joining us tonight. Take good care, everybody. Good night. Bye-bye.
Right, thank you.